to be joined with the Chief Technology Officer of Digicrypt Blockchain Solutions, Thierry Hubert. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Hopefully I pronounced the first name right, but that's the best French accent I guess I can provide right now.
You did great, thank you.
Happy New Year to you. And obviously wanted to have you on. We've had the CEO, Chris Carl, on a couple of times, and it's truly a fascinating story about what you guys are building out. There's been some big press releases over the last and announcements over the last couple of weeks about some of the agreements that you're partnering with. So we'll start with you. You know, you basically are a lot of the softwares and the ideas as far as what Digicrypt is like, acquiring are ideas that you've put together. So maybe tell a little bit about your background, the whole relationship between you and Chris, and then obviously some of the business models that you've had in the past that have been actually acquired by companies like IBM.
Yes. So from a background perspective, I'm a technologist, right?
Yep.
And my formative years, funny enough, were in Toronto when I was working at Pricewaterhouse. But where we were really working in the transformation of analog, paper-based to electronic, and what was the impact. And then went to, from Toronto, went to Boston with Pricewaterhouse and participated in research at MIT around the impact of technology, of the soft information, the information that relates more to what we write, how we write, not just the rows and columns. And this is really when things started to change around groupware, collaboration, unstructured data. And you're talking late 80s, right? So this was really way ahead of its time. We didn't even have the internet. We were having collaborative software, and we were working with Lotus Notes. We were basically the software editor of the famous 123, the spreadsheet, and other products. So as we did the research and worked and understood the impact on organization when knowledge, tacit knowledge, is actually put onto computer systems, it changed. It changed. It changed the socioeconomic system, if you want, to the ecological system of the organization. And I left Pricewaterhouse and created and joined a company called the Human Interface Group out of Hartford, Connecticut, where we specialize solely on the psychology of collaborative software. And we had significant clients in manufacturing and pharmaceutical, banking, and so on. One of our clients was also Lotus Development Corporation's technology we were using and leveraging. And consequently, Lotus acquired our company in 1994, and we founded the Lotus Institute. Right. And we brought our approach into the Lotus Institute from an academic standpoint, from a e-learning, and you're talking 1994, right. E-learning, knowledge management, collaborative groupware software, and how to transform knowledge, tacit knowledge, into explicit assets, into an explicit knowledge that can be capitalized upon. It didn't take any time for IBM to acquire Lotus shortly thereafter, literally in 1995. And our group was really on the bleeding edge of all this community of venturists and work groups and how to capitalize knowledge. So I was asked to run the process innovation knowledge management practices in EMEA, in Europe, out of Paris. So I moved from Cambridge to Paris and work with all the big leading companies, the big telcos, and headed the R&D around internet-based solution that brought knowledge to the forefront in trying to elevate the value of telcos.
Right. Okay.
Right? And that was a big deal. So one thing to another, I come back to the United States, and we are starting to work now. I start to work on different businesses. I leave IBM once I'm back in the States, work on peer-to-peer technology just prior to 9/11. And then 9/11 occurs. Total change. Mm-hmm. So I was, we were at a point where now understanding chaotic data, understanding information overload, tapping into the streams of conversations and how to do risk mitigation and business continuation when we're faced with adversity,
right,
was becoming the new thing. We didn't talk about big data back then. Big data came up much later. We were talking about information overload. So we work on this, and I had an epiphany moment, if you want, where I was so trained on that tacit to explicit knowledge model, where we were dealing with taxonomies. We were dealing with how do we take knowledge and implement it into a workflow, a process? How do we name things? And then we had informal terms called folksonomy. And I apologize if I'm becoming too technical, but part of the narrative and the story here is understanding what information is valuable. When you know what
So
you know.
let's drum that down then, because
Sure.
you know what is, and it's fascinating. But if I'm an investor and I'm trying to understand what the business model is,
Yes.
you had a company, Darwin Systems, that was acquired by obviously
The
DIGI
IP,
Blockchain
yes.
Solutions, correct?
Yes, the IP was acquired, yes, and I came along with it.
The software that you're basically going after, and you've made some announcements with, like, you know, different various police forces, but
yes,
pretty much what it is predictive technology, predicting actual events that could happen into the future. So explain it and maybe walk us through how it works, and then obviously the most important thing, the true revenue and market potential of it all.
Sure. So when you deal with predictive technology, there's two things. You're looking at predictive in terms of telling you where things are going to be.
Yep.
Well, predictive insight is really what we're talking about. It's just the way, as human, instinctively, you know what's going to happen next because you've seen it before, right? Is something that we're used to do and to automate through analytical models and so on. So that's what usually predictive is. It's a cyclical, but when things change, when the pattern changes, is when things don't get noticed. For example, is when the predictive model is flawed and the cone of certitude, if you want, the cone of possibilities widens, and you don't really know where you're going.
Okay.
So to segue from what I was saying into particularly this question, the ability to understand the temporal displacement of information across different streams of information, whether it's financial or whether it is insight that we get from how information moves over time. As a matter of fact, that particular effort awarded the company basically the big data startup award for TechCrunch in 2012, where we took the movement of tweets and saw the pattern and see a pattern change. So what do? When you see a pattern, you know where it's going next because you've observed the past.
Right.
But when you see an emerging pattern showing up, and this is where it's interesting. So when you talk about how do we do the predictive insight and how do we move it to this financial model, is basically we reveal anomalies and we inject those anomalies into the predictive model and understand the impact they may have, either by creating a new opportunity, making it visible so that you improve decision making. For good predictive technology is not about making a decision for humans. Good predictive technology and insight is about empowering humans to make better decisions.
Okay.
And we've seen the failure of deterministic predictive technology in 2008 was the housing crash, where the systems were designed in a predictive manner on a paradigm that was not aware of the change.
Interesting.
You see?
So let me use an example. A year ago, you know, everybody wants to do New Year's resolutions, right? They want to change their diets. And I remember Game Changer, big documentary on Netflix.
Yes.
12 months later, plant-based industry has just exploded. And I have to feel like a documentary like that probably was really got the ball rolling. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a day trader and I'm looking at emerging trends and I want to be ahead of the game for all of my clients, is this stuff that we can predict in the future with how the business model is being done?
Yes, absolutely. Because the reason, and I'm so glad you bring this example up, because that's a perfect example. So you're dealing with a social movement, something that is not measures in rows and columns. And what it is, it's a theme around plant-based diet.
Right.
It's a broadcast around that interest. Well, what is important about plant-based diet? First of all, it's new. Second of all, it's about nutrition. It's about lifestyle. It's about things that connect with people.
Right.
And if they adopt it, and if it gains momentum, and this is what I'm talking about, the momentum, observing unstructured data, tapping into the food industry. So if I was somebody who invested into the food industry, the supply chain, I would have said, okay, anything related to food. All of the sudden, remember the anomaly. Oh, what do we see now? What's emerging? Plant-based. Why? Oh, it's coming from social media. It's coming from people basically responding to that Netflix documentary. There's an economic model. As a matter of fact, the son of Forks Over Knives, which was also trending with the Game Changer, created a company called Engine 9, which leveraged that and sells and distributes vegan food, I should say, or plant-based food to Whole Foods and a whole bunch of different distribution across the United States. I don't know if they're in Canada yet, but the point is, it was predictable. It was predictable because that trend was linked to an industry and to a shift in the industry, and the correlation is what we can detect, and the ability to go not only from the financial historical data, but to merge it with the movements of social interests linked to concepts that are tied to supply chain, that are tied to economic movement and to production, is where the system becomes extremely powerful.
That's
and
incredible.
that's what makes the difference right here.
So when you look at like ideal industries, like, you know, and Chris has mentioned this in the past too, that it's pretty much tailored for any industry that you can think of. You've obviously made some recent announcements working with various police forces. So is that transferable, like, to maybe other tier one industries, like, for example, banks,
100%.
governments, you know, that sort of thing?
Absolutely, 100%. As a matter of fact, we've been exploring it across industry. It just happens that law enforcement is one of the areas we got early traction. About 4 or 5 years ago, we were also analyzing politics and education in our pilot, because remember, this is a brand new technology. What we do is we basically have a partnership with IBM and IBM Watson, where Watson was trained by psychologists and behaviorists.
Interesting. Okay.
To recognize Ocean Big Five traits.
Okay.
And what's fascinating about this, it's a complete departure from what we've seen before in terms of the unstructured data or the tacit knowledge or the tacit understanding of personality of people, which usually go through deterministic tests or outdated tests like Myers and Briggs and all of these others, which are based on 100-year-old technology almost. What's fascinating about this new approach is that human know-how was in formal academic know-how was taught to a system, so that the way you write, how you write, can actually express a personality trait. More importantly,
really?
Oh yeah, and more importantly, we call it projected personality interpreter. Why?
Just by the way somebody writes.
Just by the way somebody writes. And this is a science, right? It's the Ocean Big Five science. This is academic. This is not a mad scientist making this stuff up in the basement. And what's beautiful about this approach is that we're looking at projected personality. So the way I'm talking to you right now, the intent and the context of our conversation, I'm projecting a personality, knowingly or unknowingly, that is adapted to the situation. If I talk to my wife, believe me, I talk in very different personality and tone that I talk to you right now. Why is this important? Because what affects us day to day on how we express ourselves changes those traits. So my susceptibility to stress may change. It is not a core personality trait, although I might have an inclination towards it. It might be heightened in how I express myself in the work environment, or guess what? Towards my employer, as a candidate, like we are doing in law enforcement, or even as a CEO towards my shareholders. The personality I craft to communicate, to convey a message to shareholder is extremely important in how they trust the company and the performance of the company. Our ability to detect the personality trait of those expressions and correlate it with performance gives us predictive insight as to the future performance of a company based on the expression of an executive towards a shareholder, for example.
It's all about the data, isn't it?
It's making the data visible. It's making what's buried deep through technology, artificial intelligence, and advanced analytics visible, so it can become a new independent variable that we correlate in order to get better decision making, to accelerate our understanding and insight.
I want to ask too, is there any cautions here? You know, let's face it, data is so valuable for so many business models in, you know, the year 2021, and it has been for a number of years now. But people's obviously concerns is the amount of data that's being obviously collected and privacy issues. So is there any caution here, meaning sectors having too much reliance on this technology and not, you know, trusting their gut?
110% right. So there is caution to have on this. And one of the reasons I was giving you the path was it was particularly this concept of deterministic approach and wanting to automate and create workflow on everything.
Okay.
It doesn't make us smart. It automates us. How many of us have been frustrated calling support center that cannot think outside the process? And they're, you know, okay. So, and so we have to learn the process, not the human, because we know the human is limited. Why? Because of companies have made the choice to industrialize knowledge.
Right.
And that's wrong.
Yeah.
You can industrialize a process as part of your supply chain. But for decision makers, for people who are interfacing with the unknown or the public, you have to have the ability to make the right decision, to understand what the situation is. If it has existed before, what is the best course of action? The caution I have on that particular arena, going back to the crisis in 2008, is around establishing workflow and processes on predictive systems and blindly letting them run on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And the attrition of knowledge of experts, of the people who understand, will occur over time, and nobody's going to understand how to fix the system. You'll have to reinvent the wheel. The cost, you think you're saving money, the cost is higher. Insight and predictive is an intimate relationship between subject matter expert, where they put the computer's AI and analytics at their service, not the other way around.
Interesting.
Right? That is key. And then in terms of projected personality services, we do it in law enforcement. We're getting right now involved into HR, into resource placement, wellness assessment, and reducing attrition, helping people to be in a better place, better recruited. If a company looks at this data and classifies it and correlates it with race, religion, they're in violation of fair acts. Mm-hmm. In the United States, for instance, employment obligations and contractual obligations, they might actually become liable if they use inside technology in a way that is not intended to be used, by creating black and white segregation or black and white decision on these tools, instead of being inspired to know exactly where to ask the question, where to probe, which is exactly what we do in law enforcement. We're helping police department to show them risk assessment and optimal assessment, and some traits are weak, and they use our system to ask intelligent question to validate a strong traits or to challenge a weak trait. So this is where the caution comes in. Do not attempt to blindly automate insight and predictive model. Sooner or later, it will break.
So the business model, the idea, sounds rather interesting. What can we expect revenue-wise with something like this? Is this fast track for DigiCrypt's shareholders going into 2021, with obviously being acquired, and then a lot of the, like I said, software that's being adapted? Does it manifest rather quickly with multiple industries that you plan to target going into the next 12 months?
Absolutely. And as you can see from the latest announcements, we have Police Exam Solution of Massachusetts already has several police department online on the system, and they were one of the first one. We, as a matter of fact, what's fascinating with what's happening right now, the desire for police reform and finding tools that are appropriate to help them make better decisions, to understand how to overcome some of the challenges in terms of sustainability and promotion, and helping people retrain them. We are the only one in the market who offers that kind of insight, who actually is a departure from the traditional ability testing. So we are very excited about this. Even if we were to get a small percentage of the market, if you look at the United States alone, you're dealing at over 700,000 to 800,000 police law enforcement officer, and we're not talking, other related fields in the law enforcement. So we correctional officers and staff and all that. And if you look at the English-speaking world, which is where we're targeting, UK, Canada, Australia, we're looking over 2 million. If we get a small percentage of that, and the range of service is, you were asking the business model, it's pretty much a SaaS, right? So it's an annuity-based system, and you could range between $10 to $25 a law enforcement officer with a 10% penetration in the market. It is a significant revenue stream, and it's a revenue stream that is annuity-based. So it's real, and growth helps us a great deal. Now, there's different varied level of services we can offer, and add-ons and channels and VARs and so on. But the reality is that we are ahead of the pack. And right now, with what's happening in the world and the desire to improve law enforcement through innovative technology, puts us in a prime spot to answer, to help out, and to do it in a way that is affordable, that is meaningful.
That's great.
That's exactly, it's great. I mean, we're doing good. We really are doing good, and the opportunity is there.
Well, listen, I appreciate the time. Very thorough, obviously, with how this works, and appears to be a tremendous opportunity as people learn more and more about this space. But I think once you start to get an understanding of it all and see how effective it is, people can then take a very calculated investment decision. And we've seen some tremendous growth, obviously, with the company since you've gone public back in October. So again, Happy New Year. Appreciate the time, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you very much for your time and this opportunity, and very happy to New Year to you too and your audience.
Yeah, okay. Take care. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.